Welcome to another episode of The Wine Buzz. My guest today can best be described as a man with many illustrious facets. His first loves are his family, which include a cat, music, novels, books, paintings, and of course, art. He's a huge fan of great boxers, and he is himself a practicing exponent of the Muay Thai boxing arts. He's a trained lawyer, holds a postgraduate certificate in Chinese art with distinction from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. Not only that, he is the deputy chair of the Asian Decanter Wine Awards and is recognized worldwide as a Bordeaux specialist. My guest is Tiong, who now joins us. Welcome to the APWASI Wine Buzz interview, Tiong.
It's very kind of you, Clinton. You mustn't believe everything you read. It's very kind of you, and thank you for having me. And this wonderful background behind you. What a lovely day it is in Vancouver.
Thank you so much. There's so many things, so we would like to know about you, and also, share with our audience around the globe. You trained as a lawyer, and you possess expertise in so many other areas. How did your career begin, and how did you get to your wine career today?
I actually did not want to study law, but the year I applied at the university, I was going to apply to study history, philosophy, and political science. But unfortunately, the arts program, you needed to have passed your pre-university science, which I never did. I always failed my science, although I've always known that the heart has 4 vowels, but that's the extent of my scientific knowledge. So I had no choice but to apply to law school. No regrets, because the law teaches you to think logically. So that turned out to be a great help as a journalist. So I've never practiced the law. And I've always said that, when people ask me why, I've always said that when I graduated, I had 2 bars I could have been admitted to. One, you have to stand up and deliver. The other, you can lean against and have a drink. So no guesses for which bar I preferred to have been admitted. So at university, I started writing. I wrote book reviews, travel pieces, occasional restaurant reviews. And then I started writing wine because I had become interested in it due to the generosity of my father. My father started drinking when I was, I think, pre-university or just when I got into university. So he was very generous, and Dad said, whatever you find in the house, any bottle, just help yourself. And if you like to take them out to dinner, by all means. And when I started university in Singapore, but I didn't finish it there. I finished it in New Zealand at the University of Canterbury. Coincidentally, the same faculty that Sam New, the actor, and Vigneron, he owns a wine estate in New Zealand.
Yes.
So fortunately, when I went overseas, my father gave me a very generous allowance, which allowed me to go to restaurants and drink wine on a regular basis. And my interest in wine as a writer can squarely be put down to the fact that I read Hugh Johnson's finest wine book. It's simply called Wine. I was so taken by his writing, and fortunately, I'm very lucky that later when I met him, because I was wine consultant to Jardine in Singapore, and
Right.
Hugh was wine consultant to Jardines worldwide. So I was able to meet my hero, and even more fortunately, we became friends. And I always said that if Hugh Johnson wrote about dog food, you want to read about it because he writes just so well. His prose and his command of the language and his ability to turn a phrase, an ordinary expression into something very special. Hugh just has this marvelous skill. And
Yes, he can turn gems, simple sentences into real gems. Absolutely.
yes, and he's such a generous person too. So that really makes a world of difference.
He's a true gentleman, a true gentleman. I've had the wonderful opportunity of interacting and meeting him as well, Po Tiong. Now, you have written prolifically and on several topics. So would it be fair to say that you realized you wanted to become more heavily involved in writing from the very early days of university, as you've just said?
Oh, yes. I mean, I started reading novels in secondary school, and even in primary school, I was always drawn to the written word. So writing was just such a natural evolution that it never crossed my mind to do anything else but to write.
And being a lawyer certainly helps.
It helps you think. The law is a wonderful discipline because, say, for example, you were to say, oh, there was an accident and this person was knocked down by a car. Then you start to think, well, what's the color of the car? Is it relevant? Maybe at night, if the car was white, it's relevant.
Yeah.
But in the daytime, it's not so relevant. So the law forces you to think logically and to eliminate what's not important and to retain what's important. So when I write, I think of what's relevant. And then I put myself in the shoes of my readers to, after I've written something, to say, well, are there holes in what I've written? Do I end up asking more questions than before I started reading this article? So that's very important. So it's a kind of discipline. And every few years, I go back and read this wonderful tract. I mean, this is essential reading for anyone who wants to write in the English language, which is George Orwell's Politics and the English Language. It really disciplines you to the craft of writing. And if I can sum up what is my mantra in writing, it would be obviously honesty, but just as importantly, you never take the reader for granted. Your reader is the only reason you write, and you never look down on your reader or take him or her for granted.
Very sage advice. Very, very sage advice. Now, Po Tiong, you are known as a Bordeaux specialist by many, and we have seen a rising, more impactful and influential China. It's evident, especially in the buying power of the Chinese around the world. How did Bordeaux react to this? And what advice would you offer the Bordelais for continued success with this market segment?
I wish I have the answers. I like to think that Bordeaux will always be Bordeaux, and I think that's very important. But actually, Bordeaux has changed considerably in the 30, 40 years I've been visiting. The wines have changed, the winemaking has changed. we could say that about wines around the world anyway, because modern method and more hygienic ways of making wine, temperature control, and all these scientific interventions have made wines more reliable, certainly more hygienic, more stable. But then sometimes you want something more personal in it. I don't agree with people who think that, you know, a cellar has to be messy in order to make great wine, or if something is very pristine or scientific, it can't turn out interesting wines or wines with personality. All these are aids. I don't. I keep here in my house in the south of France my original manual Olivetti Lettre 32, but I certainly don't want to go back to typing stories on that because in the first place, I can't buy the typing ribbon, and then it takes so long to type it. And as you know, you're a writer yourself, you can email a 1,000 word article, cut and paste, and all that's very efficient. So we have to be realistic and be grateful for the tools we use. But at the end of the day, the wine cannot be the same. I mean, what is the modern Bordeaux? What is Bordeaux made now cannot be the same, say, a Bordeaux from 1928,
Right.
1945, 1959. So I hope Bordeaux doesn't change in the sense that, and I know it by and large it doesn't change the taste of Bordeaux, doesn't change the attitude of what makes Bordeaux great. They may already that's done. They may tweak maybe a label. They may tweak the packaging to suit certain tastes. Just as the high-end fashion wear, fashion goods. You know, I saw somebody on Instagram or WeChat rather, showing that she has bought a pair of shoes from Gucci with tiger motifs on it. I think all that's fine. And if you were a brand owner, you would want to reach out to a market that has all of a sudden become so ascendant to address their needs or what makes them emotional about a product. So sometimes with Chinese motifs, with Chinese packaging, or packaging that alludes to Chineseness, all that is fine. But don't change the fundamentals. Wines that are made to express the place where it comes from, the varieties, and not too much oak, please. Not too much extraction, please. Wines that shine with fruit rather than structure. I was trying to explain to someone that the fruit in the wine is like a painting. All that oak, all that new oak, all that extraction is just the frame of the painting. It's not the fruit. It's extraneous. Right. So when you admire a painting, do you admire the frame or the painting? The frame is the core, so the fruit is the core. The oak is not going to make the fruit better or worse. In fact, no, I beg your pardon. The fruit isn't, the oak isn't going to make the fruit better. It's just going to make it worse.
Right. So, you mentioned about motifs. Thank you. I think it was a 2008 Chateau Lafite. They put the Chinese number 8 on a limited number, and that sold extremely well because of that. So my sense is you feel that although the Bordelais have changed their motifs to the current fashion of the purchasers, but in essence, the contents have remained, apart from the evolution of the style of winemaking, it's remained pretty true to its own terroir.
It has. That's a good example you brought up. And I would like to make the distinction between Lafitte exploiting the Chinese market, but not abusing it. So if you know your aid is, something that gels and it makes the Chinese, a heart beat faster when they see the word aid, and it makes it easier to give away as a gift. And then 2008 happened to be the year Beijing held the Olympics.
Summer Olympics, yes.
Why not exploit it? I would if I was selling a product, but I wouldn't abuse it.
Right.
So I think we can make that distinction. That it may be a fine line, and there will be times when that fine line it's very blurred. But Lafitte hasn't changed his wine.
Right.
If nothing else, Lafitte is one of the most consistent of the 5 first groves. But making people get more excited because the number 8 is there, why not? Sure. And if Mouton say, well, I think it's time, and they've done it, of course. Let's have a Chinese painter or a sculptor or writer, design our label. Why not? I think most of us would do that too in our own little spheres, whether in business or in other activities. If you know, for example, that a big chunk of your tourists are French, and you have a hotel in China, you make sure that for breakfast there's croissant, pain au chocolat.
Of course, absolutely.
So exploiting a situation, making the most of it, I think is fair game. But it's when we start abusing or taking people for granted, that's when we should think twice.
Yeah. So we're hoping that they don't engage in sort of raw, unbridled commercialism, and I would agree with you there. Now, moving along, I know another passion of yours is food. You wrote, 2 of the greatest threats to food are indifferent cooking and people indifferent to good food. Would you care to share on that a little bit more?
Food is something that it's so central to me, and it doesn't have to be anything. Doesn't have to be a delicacy or something expensive. When I go to China, and obviously with COVID, we can't. And when I'm the guest, the host goes out of his or her way to order special things for you, and I have a relatively thick skin, so at some stage I would say, oh, if you don't mind, could you order a dish with tofu, please? And tofu, very often, or if not all the time, they don't order because it's regarded as too simple or very inexpensive food. But I happen to love tofu, so I go out of my way to ask the host if I can have some of that. So food is very important to me because it's part of the culture.
Right.
I made pasta last night, so that's because I love Italian food, and my house here has some olive trees, so I can take them to the mill and get fresh olive oil, and then when I visit Bordeaux, especially in the old days, the weekend I would drive down to Spain. I would go to San Sebastian and have tapas.
Oh,
So
what a scenic place.
exactly. But I don't sleep in San Sebastian because there are too many tourists there. So I drive farther on to Logroño, which is in the Rioja. And so I'm usually the only Chinese or Singaporean tourist in the city. And then there's food again, because the food in La Rioja is quite different. So I find that getting to know and understand a culture through food, it's very meaningful. For example, I ask my Chinese friends who take it for granted, of course, and we Chinese people of Chinese descent take it all for granted. I said, do you know when the wok was first invented? Because today we assume all Chinese food, is cooked with a wok, and of course sometimes we have casserole, we roast things, but principally there is no Chinese home without a wok.
That's true.
But I mean, I'm not a food historian. I would prefer to read a book that tells me when the wok was invented, rather than read more recipes or cookbooks. Because and then when you start thinking, well, it could only have been invented when the Chinese came into contact with iron, for example.
Yes.
And then because before the advent of gas, to use so much wood to cook would have been very expensive. So from a person who studies Chinese culture, all that is very interesting for me. And I extrapolate the cooking into food and how at different times in the Chinese culture or other cultures, food, what we eat today, were first on the scene in that civilization.
Yes.
A Italian friend told me that when the first tomatoes that were seen in Italy were yellow tomatoes, they were not red tomatoes. He said, you know this because we call it pomodoro, which means golden apples.
Apples, yes.
So they would have been golden tomatoes, not red tomatoes. So these are being able to connect all these little dots is for me very fascinating.
Absolutely. At APWASI, we are very firm believers in culture, learning about culture and food and wine. And we use those several platforms to incorporate and inculcate with our readers, our students, that to truly appreciate anything about life, you should go back to the fundamentals, the food, the wine. And from there, as you mentioned, I love the word extrapolate, the culture. It will beam, it will gleam out towards you. And it's also part of that, one learns about the etiquette of how do you eat, when you hold your chopsticks, or, when you're with the fellow Indian friends, you use your right hand, and the way you hold your knife and fork. It's really encompassing culture in its true essence. Now, Po Tiong, you're considered to be the authority in Chinese wine and food pairing. You wrote as an introduction to your book, 108 Great Chinese Dishes Paired. The Chinese do not eat to live. We live to eat. Food is not just life to us, it is our very soul. How pertinent is that statement in the modern world of 2022?
Oh, it would have to depend on the individual, obviously. I think I got a bit carried away. I spoke from my heart and my soul. But I do recognize that for many people, food isn't that central or crucial. And I respect that because I respect individual freedom more than anything else. So the person says, food is not so important to me. That's wonderful because you are stating your point of view. I probably wouldn't want to have dinner with that person because it won't be very enjoyable. Because for me, food is just so central. And I think this becomes very obvious when we come into contact with other cultures and races and civilization. I have a great affinity with Italians, French, Spanish in Europe because they are just obsessed with food as we are. My house is in a little village in the south of France, and I can go into a small supermarket and buy 20 different types of butter. So that's just remarkable. And you can, if I were to buy beef, it will tell me where the beef comes from. It may be French, but it will also inform me that perhaps it was processed in Germany, and so on and so forth. So I really admire the fact that for the French, food ingredients and food safety, the origin, the AOC, appellation, and so on, it's just so fundamental. It's just so crucial.
Yes.
And to an extent, we have lost it. I mean, food is very important to me, but I certainly don't find the same degree of governance in a supermarket in Singapore, nor in China. So we have so much to learn from each other in the way we conduct our daily lives, whether work-wise, social, domestic, or personal. So I feel just so at home in France because the things I care about, what I put into my mouth, where it comes from, these considerations are paramount. I mean, this is a little village, and we must have like 6 to 8 boulangeries where people just on a daily basis can buy a baguette starting from like 6 in the morning. And that's normally between 6 and 7 and 8 when they buy their bread, their baguette. I'm a city boy, so I probably crawl in about 10 o'clock after I wake up. I take my time, but it's just so fundamental a part of their lives.
So it's truly the backbone, the character, and food is fundamental there, which leads me to the next question. You know, as the publisher, author of 100 Top Chinese Restaurants of the World, the 2019 edition, the 2020, what drove you to deliver this piece of work? And how did you manage to make your selection and methodology?
I wanted to do something outside wine, but still connected to it. And it crossed my mind that, you know, Chinese food is the most wide prevalent cuisine in the world.
I mean, it is, if I can interrupt you there, you know, in the United States, if you were to take, it is said, if you were to take McDonald's, we're going to compare with them, but McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, and Kentucky Fried Chicken, if you were to combine them all together, they wouldn't number the amount of Chinese restaurants there are in the United States. So yes, we're extremely prolific. So it's the methodology and your selection, because I'm sure you only selected 100. There must have been very many sad faces that weren't included.
Yes, I will be the first person to confess that although I selected 100, I would have tried maybe 300 or so around the world. But I didn't want that to stop me from doing it. It crossed my mind that the most prevalent cuisine in the world, the longest unbroken culinary tradition in the world, there wasn't a guide to their top restaurants.
Mhm.
And I hear people in Hong Kong, in China, and now in Singapore complaining that, oh, you know, we don't trust Michelin or this or that other guide when it comes to Chinese cuisine, Chinese restaurants. And I said, well, what's the point of complaining and not doing something about it? What's the point? Because if this goes, I mean, if all you can do is complain and not do something about it, well, then the people you think are not getting the job done or getting it right can get away with it. So,
that's true. Now, just coming back, because we'd really love to hear this, I'm sure. What is the basis of selection? Was it a particular dish? Was it, was it based on using the type of ingredients? I mean, what were the two salient points of selection?
Taste being the most important. Taste was the most important. And I paid for all my meals. I would fly to any city, including Delhi, Mumbai, and I would stay in a hotel, and I would pay for the meal. They wouldn't know I'm coming, and even if they did, I mean, they wouldn't know who I was anyway, because I didn't start this book except in 2017 when I did 50 restaurants, Bordeaux wine, and then 2018 was 50 restaurants, Bordeaux and Champagne, and 19 and 20 wines of the world became 100. So all those 4 editions, I paid for all my meals. But
let me ask you there. You could have paid for your meals, which gives you that independence. But could you perhaps have visited a restaurant that had a bad day?
Yes, of course. I mean, that would happen in any kind of cuisine we are going to assess. It was not possible to go to a restaurant. I mean, most of the restaurants I would have patronized for years, let's put it this way. Some I patronized for 20, 30 years. And those I could go on a regular basis. When I flew into Delhi and Mumbai, I went in, and then that same night, I caught a connection, I think, to Amsterdam.
Okay.
I think in Delhi, I stayed overnight. The most extreme was a restaurant in Melbourne. I flew the red eye, got in the morning, and then took a taxi to the restaurant for lunch, and then went back to the airport and took the night flight back to Singapore. So that was the most extreme, because I just didn't have time to stay on longer. So I'm the first one to admit that I would have missed restaurants. That's for sure.
Okay.
And
that's understandable with such a large number of restaurants. All I personally can say is, having traveled extensively myself, I would say there's always a Chinese restaurant somewhere in some little corner of the world. And I recall walking near the port area in Djibouti, near the Horn of Africa. You'd have the traditional yellow and red glittering lights saying, with Chinese characters, Chinese restaurant in the middle of nowhere,
I think to sum it up, Clinton, to sum it up, I was prepared for people to say, you know, you missed this and you missed that and you missed that. And then I would say, oh, to myself, God, I got to go and check it out. I was prepared for that and ready for that, rather than for the rest of my life said, well, why didn't you do something about it? Why didn't you put all together a guide, you know, for your top 100 Chinese restaurants in the world? Your selection. And then if you didn't include everybody, you didn't get some right, get it better every year, every year, every
Right.
year, rather than not having done it.
So I think in North American parlance, they would say, well, you know, you can talk the talk, but in your case, you walked the talk, which is wonderful. Now, coming back, because our time is running out, Po Tiong, how important and relevant is Singapore in the world of wine today, in your opinion?
Well, in scale, it's not so important because Singapore is a very small country.
Yes.
I think we are strategically, geographically in a good spot, very well located. But in the bigger scheme of things, we're not so important. But we can, of course, add to the conversation. And if you have something relevant to say, you can be a small voice, but there will be enough people who are interested to listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always, I always thought that even if I were a minority of one, I would still be a reality. So if you think what you do makes sense or can contribute, add to the discussion, open the perspective, do it. So that for me is important. And my next career, so to speak, is somewhere I just come back from last week. I was in Cognac. I first visited Cognac more than 30 years ago. I'm off to Scotland in April. I first visited Scotland also about 30 years ago. So this year marks the 10th anniversary of myself being inducted as a keeper of the Quake.
Yes.
And so I'm migrating to the spirit world more.
Okay, well, we look forward to that. We look forward to that. During my visits and training in Scotland, I remember, you know, the quaich, you know, which they had. So I'm going to move on to reviews, wine reviews. You know, many people across the globe, they do rely on wine reviews. And there are those that do approach the reviews with a degree of skepticism. Recently, an article in Meininger's Wine Business International, which was written by Lisa Perotti Brown, MW, the former editor-in-chief of Wine Advocate, she claimed, quote, supposedly reputable publications, one that claimed to be independent, suffer from numerous conflicts of interest. And she further stated that this meant faith in wine review has been eroded to the point where buyers no longer know who they can trust. So that's one example. And then there are other, and it's a well-known public fact, that there are wine reviewers who state they review 25,000 wines a year. That's approximately 2,000 bottles a month. And on a 5-day week, that's 500 bottles a day. That's staggering. Even if there was a tasting team, that's a monumental number. One of biblical proportions, one might say. So share with us your insights and thoughts on the value of wine reviews and the comments that Lisa referred to in 2022.
Well, when Lisa joined the Wine Advocate, it had, just before that, it was sold by Bob Parker to a syndicate of wine lovers. So I actually broke the story on decanter.com, who actually bought it. And it turned out to be a syndicate of people in Singapore.
That's correct.
And I broke the story that the person, the head of the syndicate, the chap actually owns a wine business. And so I queried in the piece I wrote, if Bob Parker puts himself up as a champion of the consumer, why is he afraid to name who these people are? I mean, he's a trained lawyer too. In fact, he was a practicing lawyer.
Yes.
So why not be transparent? If you say you are the champion of the consumer, you are the wine advocate of the consumer, what's there to hide? Why can't you reveal the name of your buyer? There's nothing to be secretive about that. So Lisa then became, I don't know when, became the editor of the Wine Advocate. I think it's very, for me, it seems a bit strange that after working, I believe, 7 years at the Wine Advocate, all of a sudden, she comes out with a publication which she claims is fiercely independent. So is she admitting that she wasn't so independent before? I think as a trained lawyer, going by the language, that has to be a conclusion one can make. So I think if she wants to name names, which publication she feels is not independent, why not just name it? I mean, why dabble in all these conspiracy theories? If you're claiming you're so independent, someone else isn't, and you use this example, are you using a bogeyman to say you are so independent when this one isn't? Then just name it. I mean, why are we hiding behind these shadows? Do we need to say someone is no good in order to say we are so fabulous?
Mm-hmm. So from the consumer's point of view then, Po Tiong, what's the relevance or amount of trust they can put in wine reviews now? I mean, the other example of, 25,000 wines being reviewed a year.
Well, unfortunately, wine writers like to be very macho or very egotistical. And one way they go about it is to brag how many wines they can taste a day or a morning. The late Jacques Boissonneau was a great friend, someone I looked to highly. He was the right-hand man of Professor Emile Penou. And when Professor Penou retired, Jacques Boissonneau set up his own consultancy and was consultant to more than 200 clients. Mr. Boissonneau passed away a few years ago, and now his son, Eric Boissonneau, who's a PhD in ampelography and enology, is again also consultant to more than 200 properties. So Jacques Boissonneau and Jean-Claude Berry, 1964 to 2008, winemaker at Petrus until he retired, and then his eldest son, Olivier Berrouet, took over. They have told me years ago on separate occasions, I didn't even prompt them to say it. They were just saying it in the course of conversation to me when we were tasting wine or just chatting. And they said to me, unprompted, they said, Po Tiong, after you taste 20 wines, the palate gets tired.
Absolutely.
And
even
these are
before 20. I mean, through personal experience as well.
And these are two of the greatest winemakers of Bordeaux who taste so many wines, so many blends to compose the final vintage, the final assemblage, to make the assemblage. And they said independently, without any prompting, after you taste 20 wines, your palate gets tired. And so these are two great winemakers. And then the rest of us wine writers, we beat our chest. Oh, I taste 100, 200 wines a day. And here you are, Clinton, you made a wonderful calculation. There's 500 a day. Goodness gracious.
500 a week, 100 a day.
Yeah.
100 a day.
Do you even have time to brush your teeth and have lunch or have a sandwich?
So that's the reason why, you know, I think there are many out there that are saying, well, how truly independent are these? I think the question of wine reviews itself will be reviewed in time, and with, you know, the new digital apps that are coming out, and the sense of more of the consumer giving their own points of view. Now, there's so many questions and so much more that I would love to ask you, but because of time constraints, you know, Po Tiong, you're the embodiment of someone who truly enjoys life from many different aspects, from the wine, the food, the travel, and above all, the friendship that you have cast your spell and charisma across. Now, you know, with a limited time that you have, you are obviously discerning. What are your three loves? I'm going to end off this interview with the question: what are your real loves, apart from family and you know, we all love our families, but apart from that, what are your true three loves in life?
Paintings, music, and novels.
Okay. And not necessarily related to wine or food.
I mean, I can survive on the most simple food. If I had to take something on a desert island, just one thing, it would be a painting, a piece of music, or a book, because you know, I can catch some fish, I suppose. I can collect the rainwater. But you want something, well, for me, these are the things that opens up a universe.
Right. Now, before I let you out of the ring, you're the creator and publisher of many pieces. Where can our listeners find your work?
I'm migrating increasingly to Instagram, so they can go on my handler, which is my name, Chng Tiong. That's my Instagram handler. And my website.
Could you spell that? Just spell that, please.
Yes, please. CHNGPOHTIONG.
Marvelous.
And my website is also chngpotiong.com.
Marvelous, marvelous. It's been such a pleasure having this time spent with you and learning about all your experiences, passions, and I'm sure that I know from a personal perspective, having read many of your works and following you, that our audiences and my audience and followers will be equally intrigued and learn so much from you. Thank you very much for being with us, Po Tiong.
You're too kind, Clinton. I'm the one to say thank you very much to you, your viewers, your listeners, your readers, and also to wish everyone a very happy Lunar New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Po Tiong. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers. Please comment, like, share, or subscribe to our videos.